is our Zoom about the Sparkbird Project. Jenn Lodi-Smith is the scholar in residence here at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. And so what she does with the Sparkbird Project, and she will speak a lot more on this later, um, is sort of collect different data on different people's spark birds and like when they had them, what the birds were and things like that. And part of her residency here is that she talks about her current findings. So that is what will be talked about in this presentation. Um, I will let Jenn take it away. So she's going to talk about like what a sparkbird is, different sparkbird stories, and then of course like her current findings and things like that. All right, Jenn.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting this. I'm really excited to share this current update of where we are with the Sparkbird project and follow up with really what has been a number of years of collaborating with the Peterson Institute and the encouragement of the Peterson Institute to not just share these stories, but celebrate these stories and learn from them along the way. So, when I think of this project, one of the first questions that people often ask me is how I began my journey with the Sparkbird project. And I'm a tr personality developmentalist. I have my PhD in personality development, and I've studied identity development for almost 25 years now. So it maybe is not the most logical space to find me in love with birds, but I did. I've had this wonderful career of studying identity development, stories of people over time, and how their stories combine with long-term change and data of who they are and who they are becoming, looking at in the context of later life and how our hobbies and interests and learning new things and self-expanding help us maintain and engage with our cognitive health and our overall wellness, bringing that most recently into the space of older adulthood for autistic individuals and folks with elevated autism characteristics, with a wonderful grant from the National Institute of Aging to understand autism in later life, which is the area that is understudied. And all of this was sort of going on in my life while at the same time, I had two wonderful kids. And you may see where this is going because my kids were really the people who brought me to the natural world. My older kiddo, Sam, from some of their earliest days, going out in the natural world was where they became themselves. They loved discovering the wonder of the natural world, seeing what was around them, and celebrating nature. My daughter Maisie, by the time she was old enough to speak, was telling us that, boy, she loved birds. And we look back now, her Sparkbird story is, I don't remember a time I didn't love birds. I was born loving birds. And we were incredibly fortunate as a family that I have a colleague, Dr. Sarah Morris, pictured here with this beautiful rose-breasted grosbeak, who is an incredible ornithologist. She took us under her wing, as we love to say, and welcomed us not just to the birding community, showing us how to use our binoculars, suggesting places where we could go see the birds that we were most excited to see, especially back then when Maisie was little, it was owls. So going to find owls, going to see woodcocks. Discovering the birds around us in our community. She also welcomed us into the space of migratory songbird banding and getting us opportunities to be hands-on to learn and discover birds through contributing to that amazing way of learning about the science of bird migration through volunteering at migratory songbird stations. And so she really just opened so many doors and so many opportunities for us, and we continue that as a family. We're still out in nature exploring things. We still are out volunteering at banding stations. And through this, it was really looking for a way to give back, as so many people do when they discover their love for birds. We appreciate the birds, but we also want to find ways to help and care for the birds. And we are doing all of the good things of, making sure that our windows are safe and drinking our bird-friendly coffee. We were volunteering with our local wildlife rehab center. I took bander training classes from Braddock Bay Bird Observatory, all of these things where I could contribute and be useful. But I wanted something more. I wanted a way for my skills as a personality scientist to be able to contribute to our understanding of birds. And I thought for a little while, like, oh, well, maybe this bird banding space, I can study individual differences in the behaviors of birds from the banding station and look at birds that are maybe, more bold and birds that are quieter. And I always sort of developed a whole paradigm of what I could do, but that wasn't quite really where I was feeling drawn, and I was continuing to sort of think about this and have all these wonderful experiences with birds. And one of the wonderful experiences we had was something that Sarah had suggested that we do together as a family and go to Hog Island Audubon Camp. Hog Island is this beautiful island off the coast of Maine that was a task given to a young Roger Tory Peterson to go and find an island that would be suitable for a bird camp. And so young Peterson went off as an employee of Audubon and found this island that was then uh, gifted to Audubon by the family and became Hog Island Audubon Camp. Peterson was the first bird life instructor at the Audubon Camp, welcoming people to the amazing birds on the island and teaching them about the natural world. And it was right there on that island, probably about 80 years later, after he was there, 80, 90 years later, where I first heard the term sparkbird. And I was standing, I was waiting for the puffin boat because you get to go. Not only can you be there with your family, or your teens can go on their own, or you can go discover field ornithology and art at Hog Island camps, but you get to go on the puffin boat and see the puffins off the coast of Maine. And so I was waiting for the puffin boat. I complimented someone on her tattoo, and she said, "Thanks, they're my spark bird." And I had never heard this term before. I was a relatively new birder, and I said, "Well, what's a spark bird?" And she explained to me that a spark bird is the bird that helps us fall in love with birds and helps us discover the world of birding. And I was captivated by this concept. I'd been studying stories of people's transformative life experiences for most of my professional career. It was one of the things that helped me find an interest in identity development and personality science in general, was that people's stories are an important part of who they are and how they discover the world. That the birding community had these shared narratives of who they are, how they come to their love, was incredible, because I've had other interests and hobbies through my life. I have certainly, as a runner, been on a run and thought, wow, I wonder how people come to that moment when they finally say, yes, I am a runner. Have I gone to study that? No, maybe someday. Maybe there'll be a Spark Run project someday. But what that never really caught. And I think the reason that that never really caught as a program of research for me was because with the birding community, the stories are already there. They are stories that we share with each other. I love being out on birding outings and hearing people who don't know who I am sharing their Sparkbird stories with each other behind me on a trail. They are things that we know about each other. There are things that we know about famous birders. And I actually knew a sparkbird story before I even heard about the concept of sparkbirds. And so that story was Roger Tory Peterson's story. And I heard that story on my very first visit to the Roger Tory Peterson Institute with my kids as we went on pilgrimage to visit the Peterson Institute. And so I'm going to pause my talking and I'm going to turn things over to Rachel, the curator at the Peterson Institute, to share a little bit about Peterson's story, about the Institute, and about this beautiful mural that you see pictured here as well that captures his story and his journey.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so definitely for us when we talk about Roger, like especially when we're introducing people to the space, we do mention his Sparkbird. So that's the golden flicker, and like you can see in this image, this is in our art studio. It's a mural by Aaron Ruffino, and so it actually tells the story of like his increasing interest in birds and how he had this moment where I think it was on Swede Hill. He was in the seventh grade and he was out with some friends, and he was walking by and they saw this little pile of they didn't know if it was leaves, and then they realized it was feathers, and it was a golden flicker, and it was exhausted from migration, they think, but they thought maybe it was deceased. But so what they got to do was they got to get really close, and then he even got to touch it. But obviously, being a living bird and then suddenly being touched by someone, the flicker kind of like jumped up and looked at him, and then it flew away. And so he always marked that as a time where after that, birds had him hooked. Which is funny because if you like look into any of his bios before that, he was really interested in moths. And so he studied moths all the time. He got a special like certificate from the chief of police that let him stay out past 8 so he could catch moths by the street lamps. But as soon as he saw the flicker, that kind of changed his trajectory. And um, even though he went to art school later, a lot of people are surprised that he didn't go to school at Cornell or anything. It was something he considered. But even as he went to art school and things, it still transferred to that. And that's why he ended up doing his field guides and why art was such a huge part of it. Um, but yeah, that was a very, very important moment for him and definitely sparked his interest in everything ornithological.
And really such an important spark moment for the birding community, right? Because without that bird and that moment and that time, I mean, we gotta think that like Peterson would have been sparked into birds eventually, but that really ignited Peterson, who then went on to ignite that whole generation with the creation of the modern field guide in this way that democratized birding for people that thought about and saw and had access to birds in a way that they hadn't before, that along with the advent of better optics, that really parallels our time now that we are in, where people are rediscovering birds in this new era now. And Peterson was really a gift to so many people, and his creativity a gift to so many people in that time. And one of the things that I love about going for a visit to the Peterson Institute is feeling that and seeing that resonate through the artwork that y'all have on exhibit, still celebrating the relationship of people and nature and how we appreciate art through nature is so beautiful. The other thing that we think we can credit Peterson with is actually the creation of the term sparkbird itself. This is something that Rachel and I have been in conversation about for a few months now, that trying to track down the origin of this term. Really, it seems that the earliest use of the term spark in relationship to birding is from Peterson's Birdwatchers anthology, published in 1957. He has this beautiful image of the swallows, and it's titled "The Spark." And he's curated a number of stories, including people who were real leaders in birding in that time, in that era, and the stories of how they came to their love for birds. And he goes on to share some other stories along the way later on in the book. But that space seems to be the first place where we see the term spark. And if any listeners know of other contexts where this was earlier, please reach out and let us know. We'd love to continue our work in uncovering this. But we think that he actually came up with this term. And in his own writing, you don't see him share this idea, this concept, and the story of this spark moment until a little bit later in his writing. And that really shows that for many of us, our sparkbird stories are, we don't necessarily know it in that one moment in time, right? Some of us do, some of us absolutely do. But for others, it's thinking back, it's reflecting about the meaning of experiences that we've had in our life and how they inform who we are now, that we know that moment was transformational for me, and our relationship with those experiences change over time, which is part of what we see in transformational experiences broadly in our science. So, what we do with the Sparkbird Project is to gather those stories together. When I realized this concept of sparkbirds, I knew that I had heard a few stories. I had heard Peterson's. I had heard Corinna Newsom's on an episode of Bird Note where she shares this wonderful moment of like, oh my gosh, blue jays are real and they're so incredible. And how was I not seeing this? But I really struggled to find, there was no central repository to see and read and appreciate and learn from the stories of the everyday birder. Certainly, I could find birders who had made it enough to publish their memoirs or to be on a podcast or to have a blog, but they were scattered. And so the Sparkbird Project, in part, just gather these stories together so that you can go to our website and read hundreds of stories that people have shared with the project over time. And then, of course, we learn from those stories. And we'll get to some of what we're learning a little bit later. But I really want to take this moment to have us pause and think about our own stories. The prompt for the Sparkbird Project comes from narrative identity research, looking at life story interviews, looking at self-defining memories, combining those together, and asking people to think of that vivid moment when they were transformed into loving and appreciating birds. And we always remind people in this that when we share our stories with other people, we are connecting with them. We are sharing ourselves, we are sharing our own relationship with birds and the natural world. And in doing so, we are creating the ways that we understand how people come to discover birds. And so for some people, it is that one vivid moment in time, like Peterson. But for other people, it is a slow burn. It is not necessarily one moment. Maybe it's a few different moments across the lifespan. Maybe it's like me, where I don't have a spark person or a spark bird. I have spark people in my kiddos and my friend Sarah. We just had our 500th story shared with the Sparkbird Project the other day. It was not a bird, it was the movie The Big Year, right? So Sparkbird stories come in all different shapes. They're just as variable as birders are, they're just as variable as birds are. And part of what we're trying to do is gather those stories together, celebrate those, and share them with each other. And so what I'm going to do now is invite Stacy Ott, the new CEO at the Roger Tory Peterson Institute, to join us and welcome her to the Sparkbird community and ask her to share her story with the viewers.
Hi, Jen. Thank you. I'm excited to be here at the helm of RTPI. I'm in my fourth month and I've already added at least 15 new birds to my life list, my messy, not very well kept, organized life list, including some barred owls that we just saw last week here in our preserve right here. I have to say, my spark bird, I've been watching birds a bit as a kid. I grew up in Missouri, so we had woods kind of around us. We did the bird feeder and winter thing, and that was enjoyable. But as I got a little bit older, I think I started trying to figure out, who was who. Didn't have a Peterson guide yet, but that was soon to follow. But it was a pileated woodpecker, which are, of course, large, super dramatic, reminded me of the cartoon Woody the Woodpecker for anyone that is of an age to remember such a such a cartoon, but he it was so obvious, so big, so dramatic looking. And then I was standing in front of our glass door inside our kitchen, and he flew right at the door, which of course was its own like, what's happening? And he actually landed on the door handle. And so we were literally inches away, and I was in shock. Probably my mouth had dropped open at that point, like, what is happening here? And then there go the wings, and he's gone. And I maybe heard or saw him a time or two, in the woods after that. But I would say that for sure was that moment where I'm like, okay, I have to get a little more into this than I had been. And so, and then after that, I've just been kind of following birds as I can. I get distracted here and there, but I got a Peterson guide probably a few years after that. Still have that particular guide, which has a little age on it, but it has little notes and has my little partial life list in the back. And the whole thing. And he really did create a great system, I have to say. I have a lot of respect for Roger, especially, of course, as I learn more now.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that story so much. I love too this like old copy of Peter. I think so many of us in the
Yeah.
birding community have our old copy of your first field guide, which for many folks is Peterson. I know I have mine. It's right on my shelf behind me, and it's got these tick marks in it on the checklist in the back
Mhm.
from when I was a teen and had this brief moment. It's one of my many near misses of almost becoming a birder. And I have heavy skepticism about some of those tick marks, thinking back to where I
Right.
was and when I was. I'm like, oh yeah, no, you didn't see that. But that's okay. That's okay. The interest was there. And, this waxing and waning that you're talking about as well. For many people, birds are there and then they're a little quieter and then they're back again. Um, and I think that's an important piece of what we're learning from the Sparkbird project is that while in the birding community, we often have this sort of dominant narrative of Peterson's story as this is the way that it should be, and everybody should have this one transformative moment. And for many people, there are these breathtaking moments, like your woodpecker. And then, but it's not doesn't always transform us completely in that moment, and the experiences accrue, and birds are always there to re-spark us, and people and community are always there to re-spark us as well, which is really one of the most important components of the Sparkbird findings so far. Um, I want to take a moment to invite one of our attendees, Joe Trezza, in to join with us. Rachel, do you think you can invite Joe as a panelist? And then maybe we can edit this little part of inviting him out. Joe, if you can join us. Joe is the person who wrote the article about the Sparkbird Project for BWD Magazine, which is part of what we are here to follow up on. That article was published earlier this year. Hey, Joe, how are you? And Joe wrote this piece for BWD. BWD is published by Mike Sakopoulos, who's a member of the board of the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. And so this whole community of birding is sort of part of what we're here to see and celebrate today. And Joe, I would love it if you could share your story, your Sparkbird story, or even stories, as we've talked about with our listeners, because you also have this sort of multiple time point arc in your journey.
Yeah. So I can really relate to that in terms of waxing and waning over time. Can everybody hear me okay, by the way? Okay. I don't usually use these headphones, so wasn't quite sure. Um, my spark moment happened when I was a kid. I was, I think, 12 years old, and I'd been interested in nature and kind of like introduced a little bit to bird banding by a teacher. Um, and then I think it was on summer vacation. We were in upstate New York and with my family and watching sunset at the edge of this beautiful lake when this flock of it, which I think had to be about 100 turkey vultures. Now, I think the size of the flock has grown in my memory as I've aged. Um, so it could have been maybe 20 or 30, but there were a lot. And for a kid who was about the same size, maybe smaller as their wingspan, it was kind of this momentous, unforgettable moment for me. And they would kind of taxi around like jetliners in the air and single file to their roost, and they'd swoop really low past us as they were doing that. And I was just mesmerized. Um, and I was kind of hooked from there. So that was about 2 decades or so ago. And um, I became pretty into it as a kid, even though I didn't have a lot of other younger people to maybe do it with. And then I always kept it in the back of my mind in life as life kind of switched to other things. As I went to college and then moved around a little bit, got some other jobs. And, it wasn't the most important thing or at the forefront of my life. And then in the last 5 years or so, it's really rekindled in a way that I sort of can't control now. And so I'm, um, but that was really great because when I got back into birding, I don't want to say full time, but regularly, um, I was kind of armed with all this, everything I'd learned as a kid, and
Mhm.
also equipped with this perspective about how things have changed over time. And so that was really enlightening. I came with this, strong foundation back into birding, and it's really helped solidify it in my life as a really important element. Um, and now I'm birding all the time, and I'm writing articles about birding and books about birding, and it's really kind of blossomed. As that's been happening, it's kind of been amazing to see how widespread um, and how popular it's become amongst people. Because that was something that I remember not imagining very possible when I started out. But anyway, it all started with the turkey vulture, and it may not be the sexiest spark bird because they urinate down their own legs and whatnot. And they've been reviled throughout history, I would say unfairly, for various reasons. But that's mine, and it's my favorite bird because of that, and I think it always will be.
Thank you so much, Joe. I love this. Uh, these moments where we come back to discovering our love of birds and can re-enter that. And I think that's something that is sort of inspirational for a lot of people, that we can love birds and we can come back to it. And we don't have to be in it, our whole lives, but they can always be there for us. And they often come back in times when we need them. It's one of the things that we're seeing. Rachel, do you have a sparkbird story that you would like to share?
Sure. Well, and so it was funny when you had said about doing this talk and everything. I didn't know if I had one.
Mm-hmm.
And like especially when I started here, like I'd always kind of liked birds, but it didn't feel like I had like super gone out of the way to like explore them or anything.
Mm-hmm.
My one grandfather like is very good with birds. He like used to train like racing pigeons. So I've always had
Oh,
like,
cool.
yeah, and he can just sit out in his yard and get birds to like land on his hand and stuff. So like I always had that going
Cool.
on. But when I was like, I don't know, like first, second grade, I remember because they'd ask you like what you want like your career to be and stuff. And I was like, oh, I wanted to be like an astronaut and like an Egyptologist. And but there was one where I don't remember what the job title was, but I was really big into like creatures that lived in the jungle. And I was really big into parrots and like all sorts of them. And all I can think of is like I also was obviously very small and so was watching a lot of Disney movies. So there's like that scene in Tarzan where they're like in the canopy and they're like surrounded by all those parrots. And I remember being like, wow, check those out. And so for a while I was really big into like National Geographic and like getting stuff from the library about parrots and things. And obviously, we don't really have those here, but I do remember that being like, I was really, really interested. And like, I learned about like the macaws, and I really wanted one, but my mom is afraid of birds, so we couldn't have one in the house. I almost got her though. Like, but so I almost wonder, I kind of think it was like parrots. Um,
That's so interesting. And I think those childhood interests can stick with us. And then there are a number of stories in the project where our jobs help us discover birds and a way. Actually, the woman who told me about the concept of spark birds, um, story, it was basically being uninterested in birds and not wanting to do birds as part of a job, and then had to and discovered how wonderful birds are along the way. So I think our careers, well, I think the traditional way is people thinking of this childhood interest, like Peterson, the childhood interest in
mhm.
birds, but then leads to this career where you would do bird things. And but in fact, we see in the Sparkbird project that the opposite trajectory is also there, where our jobs maybe help open the world of
Mhm.
birds to us, and our eyes in new ways. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I
Um,
definitely noticed starting here, obviously. So, like, as the curator, I do with the art collection. And it, like, like, I liked birds, but like casually, but it became very clear that I would need to definitely recognize a lot more birds than I currently can. And so now, like, I was in another staff member's office and she had like a picture up, and I immediately knew what the bird was. And she
Yeah.
was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, I've been looking at the field guide plays. So yeah, definitely the job
Absolutely.
also has made me
Yeah, I
much more
love that.
enthusiastic.
That's really cool. All right. So I want to be able to take some time. One of the things that we really wanted to do with this event today was follow up on Joe's wonderful piece in BWD Magazine and share some of the current findings. We have, I think, about more than doubled the findings, the number of stories since Joe and I first talked about that,
Wow.
writing that piece, which is great. And we're hoping to double again here in this year. So we just crossed 500 stories. A number of people do share more than one story where they have multiple sparks. And I'm thinking of my colleague down the hall who just shared a childhood spark and then, sort of drifted away, as some people do, and rediscovered birds again in midlife. And so what we see with these stories is definitely one of the most common questions is when these happen, and a lot of them do happen like Peterson in childhood, though it is possible that that's part of our expectations in our community, that we know these stories of folks like Peterson who create this dominant narrative in our culture of it should be this childhood moment that sparks us into birds. We also see that the most common age right now is 8. And when we think about our opportunities that we have for young people who love birds, Joe, you were talking about being, you like had one other person maybe who liked birds.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of community around birds. Now we have this growing movement of young birder clubs around really around North America. And they help bring young people who have an interest in birds together. They are mostly geared towards kids age 10 and older. We have places like Hog Island Camp where you can go with your family if you're aged 8 to 13. But a lot of the programs are focused on teens and teen birders, thinking about career development and career paths, which is great. But what the findings from the Sparkbird Project help us see is that we also really need a space for those young people who love parrots, right? Who have that interest, and encourage those childhood interests that so often in our society we sometimes dismiss those childhood interests, and instead encourage people, engage those young people. One of the things that our Young Birder Club that my kiddos started that we really try to do is have our youngest kiddos. We were out just the other day looking at woodcocks. We had a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and our teens and our older school-aged kids were helping the littles engage with this and play games together to learn how to be once we were out in the field looking for the woodcocks. And so we can have that intergenerationality in the childhood times of the older kiddos helping to mentor the younger kiddos, and that can be a really great way to help these sparks that happen in early childhood be sustained and not, like me, become near misses that we have to rediscover. We do have a lot of people who discover their love of birds in the college years through coursework and an inspirational teacher, and then in midlife, discovering birds again through a variety of different means. Sometimes it's that career path, sometimes it's a child like me bringing them to birding. Other times it is, and I think of Phoebe Snetzinger, who was this incredible birder, the first person in the world to see 8,000 species of birds. And she was sort of a stuck-at-home housewife who was incredibly brilliant. And a friend took her out one day and she saw a Blackburnian warbler. And how can you not fall in love with birds when you see a Blackburnian warbler? And that happened in her 30s. We have folks like Amy Tan, who had this beautiful exhibit at the Peterson Institute of her art from Backyard Bird Chronicles. She didn't discover birds until her 60s. And so really at any point in the lifespan, birds can be there for us. And that's really important to acknowledge, that it's not just this one childhood type thing, that there's so many different times and opportunities to come into a love of birds. A lot of the stories in our project have happened recently, and I think that really speaks to this moment that birding is having right now, that with the advancement of technology, it echoes that time of Peterson's publishing of the field guide and the increases in optics. Likewise, we have greater access with digital technology and with changes in societal connection and social media and people making birding cool, right? Is sort of a thing that we're seeing happening. So we're definitely seeing this. We also see that with the pandemic and people discovering the natural world in general and birds in particular during that time. But we have somebody whose spark bird story happened 89 years ago. Like how incredible is that? A lifetime of birding and loving birds and everything in between. And so we really have sort of a broad variability in who these stories are coming from in the birding community. Though certainly we're seeing that resurgence of recent years. One of the things that I think is most important from these stories is the deep positivity, the joy in these stories, that they really represent moments that are happy and an essence of pride even sometimes, that mastery moment of like, I was able to figure out what that bird was in the field guide, and yay me, and I can know things and I can discover things, and that igniting interest and curiosity and discovery, or that surprise when the affiliated woodpecker does something amazing in front of us. These stories are really positive stories. They're joyful stories. Sometimes they convey more complex emotions when we are experiencing challenges in our lives, but they always carry with that real joy. And that speaks to the deep positivity that birds can bring to our lives, and that so many of us are looking for, and that we see in the research and scholarship on the benefits of birding. And a couple of great resources here. The Birdability maintains a lovely literature review of the mental health benefits of birding, and Jen Andrews has a lovely research paper recently on the benefits, not just for our mental health, but our cognitive health and our social health, and how we connect to people in the benefits of birding. And so these stories really echo what we're seeing in other spaces as well. The most common bird is a question that I get all the time. And Joe, we have a wonderful quote from you here. The eclectic mix of species is really the story that happens in these. We're closing in. I think we've just got about 200 different species that people mention across all of these. Now over 500 stories that we have. But the northern cardinal is number one, and has been holding that spot for quite some time, followed by the great blue heron. The northern cardinal does speak a little bit to the bias, the East Coast bias in our sample. Like if we look at the distribution map of the cardinal, that's where a lot of our stories are coming from. So West Coast folks down in the Southwest, folks in other parts of the country, share your stories, because that's really important data to have. While we love the cardinal, the mighty cardinal, there are certainly many other stories that are sparking folks as well. One of the things that was really surprising, I don't know why to me, but was surprising, is the number of folks who don't have birds but have spark people. And we're now over 40 of those stories in the data set, which is, I guess, affirming to me. Maybe people just feel comfortable sharing those stories because they have heard my story, but a really wonderful finding there, and important as we think about how we engage with other people. That interpersonal aspect is absolutely one of the number one things that we are learning from these stories, as well as access to resources. So, a teacher making sure that they have field guides in their classroom and feeders filled outside their window to help children discover a love for birds. A grandparent who shares their love, like in your story, Rachel, a friend who gets you out and helps you see a bird, having access to that, some travel, being able to see birds in other places, and then bringing that discovery of birds back home. All of these are important ways that we see thematically in these stories that people come to connect with birds and to each other, to the birding community, is a really important theme in these stories, where we can find connection to other people that, oh my gosh, not only was I not aware of birds, but I was not aware that there is great community around birds. And that's one of the pieces of these stories and discovery of self. Um, so these stories are also really authentic. So using some metrics that I won't get into the weeds on, we see that compared to norm samples of other written responses, through looking at the linguistic patterns of these stories are deeply, deeply authentic. We are sharing ourselves when we are sharing these stories. There is very little reason to dissemble in a sparkbird story. I would think I certainly know of stories where people thought it was one species and then learned more and realized that, oh no, actually it was this other species. But for the most part, um, unless we were like really trying to peacock ourselves in some way, we're going to be telling who we are in our sparkbird stories. And that seems to be coming through in the stories that are shared with the project, which is a new and sort of exciting finding that I'm getting ready to submit later on today. So nice to see that going out for peer review. Um, and this is important, right? Because we know that our birding population is increasing. We know that there are now millions, many millions of bird curious folks out there. We want to know how to engage them. We know the economic impact of the birding community, but we want to know how to engage them and how to help them really feel that connection to birds, that they are a birder, that that identity can be part of who they are, because we know of the enormous challenges facing our bird species right now. We know of the human related nature of so many of those declines. And as Amy said, when she was at the Peterson Institute a couple of years ago for her art exhibit, you only need to love one bird to want to save all the birds. And that's really what we're trying to learn with these projects, is how do we have those moments that help us fall in love with the birds, and that over time, as we engage with birds. And so we ask additional questions and we follow people over time with this project to see how our engagement with birds changes. Because as we engage with birds, as we learn more, we're going to want to do those things to take care of the birds, from birding ethically to taking care of our windows to working in conservation spaces and planting native plants. What do those journeys look like? And that's down the line, things that the Sparkbird Project will be able to answer. To help us get there, we need more stories. So we are hoping to double again by the end of 2026. An important part of that growth is increasing not just the numbers of our sample, but the representativeness of our sample, ensuring that we have stories from folks from all different walks of life and from around the world. And then as we get that representativeness in our sample, we are going to be able to ask other questions about the variability of birders, the variability of birding behavior, and over time, how birding changes us and how we are seeing our relationship with birds over time and in this longitudinal data set that we're building. So in closing, I encourage everybody who is listening and watching to share your story. You can do that at spark-bird.org. If you prefer to do that in paper format, I have those available. I've even done phone interviews with folks to transcribe their data. So happy to any way that you want to share your story. Some folks have recorded their story and then put a link in the data capture. However you do it is wonderful, and whatever your story is wonderful. You can visit us and see over 150 stories on our website now. You can read those. Not everybody shares their story publicly, which is fine. Just like our eBird list, we can keep that hidden if we want to, but many of those stories are there, so you can see and read those stories. You can follow us on social media. You can read especially Joe's wonderful article in BWD magazine. We have a podcast where you can listen to wonderful interviews with just absolutely incredible birders from all different areas and ways of approaching birds, from ornithologists to artists to writers and musicians. So really encourage you to check out the Sparkbird podcast and all of your favorite podcast providers. We always welcome any donations to support the work that we do, and particularly in helping us work towards our goal of being able to translate the Sparkbird project into other languages so we can get a more global look at who birders are and how they find themselves into their love of birds. I want to close by thanking the partners who were the founding partners for the Sparkbird project. And this list continues to grow, and so there's many others beyond this list, but these were the folks who were there with us in the earliest days, particularly the Roger Tory Peterson Institute. My Spark people who helped me fall in love with birds and the natural world. The amazing women who helped support the project, particularly Janet McNally, my co-host of the podcast, and our producer, Kayla Gajewski. Genevieve Fontana, who designed our logo, and Sarah, who continues to advise on all things birds with the project. And finally, just a special thanks again to the Roger Tory Peterson Institute for the support of the project over the years, for the encouragement to take this idea from an idea to implementation, and to BWD for the wonderful article for Mike Sakopoulos. You can listen to his episode. And Joe's episode is coming out in just a couple weeks here, so look for that soon on all your favorite podcast providers. A reminder as we close to be the spark, that what you do is important, and how you engage people with birds can absolutely be transformative and change their lives. So go out there and get folks birding. Thanks so much for being with us today. I'm going to send it back to you, Rachel, for any final thoughts.